covering the stories that impact your life, your town, your state, and your future. This is the Means Report with your host, Brad Means.
Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to the Means Report. We certainly appreciate you spending part of your day with us, where today our focus is on law enforcement. And we have one of the top law enforcers in the Central Savannah River area with us today to explain his job when it comes to fighting crime, what all goes into it. We see things on the news each night when it comes to cases that are being worked in this area, whether it's the sheriff's office or other law enforcement agencies. But how do those cases get from their inception to the courtroom? We want to kind of pull the curtain back today and find out what happens in that regard. Also, how you can help. You know, you play a strong role as a citizen when it comes to keeping our area crime-free, when it comes to making a dent in some of the issues that are out there. And of course, as always, we'll wrap up the Means Report with ways that you can stay in touch with us and help us get more great guests in the future, like today's special guest. He is Jared Williams. He is the District Attorney for the Augusta Judicial Circuit. District Attorney Williams, thank you for being with us today. I know you're very busy, and I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for having me. I would have worn a suit for you, but I started this morning at a preschool. So.
Did you really? What was going on over there?
Reading some books. I read one in Spanish and one in English.
Well, that's very nice. And no, you look great. I'm jealous of you. I wish we could shed the suit every now and then around here and just kind of be more casual. I wanted to just kind of check in on you, first of all. It's been about 3 years since you took office. How's the job going so far? Is it what you pictured it would be? I know you're no stranger to the DA's office, but how's everything?
It has been a busy 3 years, let me tell you, but it's been a great 3 years. You look at the trial statistics from 2019, and in Richmond County, they were at 48% conviction rate. Versus in 2022, the first full year since COVID, we were at an 80% conviction rate for the circuit. So it's going well. We are doing our part, but there's always room to grow, room to improve.
Well, that probably answers my next question then, which is how much progress are we making, whether it's the war on drugs, gun violence, any sort of crime. As the DA, do you feel like we're doing our part to reduce that?
I'll tell you, I'm going to take those two kind of separately, all right? Because the war on drugs, we have to remember that the war on drugs has been lost for a long time. And so what we need to be doing is thinking of ways that we can help people out of substance use disorder. The courts are not always the most effective way. We have a great drug court program that we support, but we're always looking for better ways to address that issue. Because for me, there's a difference between the person who's hurting themselves versus the person who's out there in our community peddling poison, and that's the people that I'm focused on.
All right, so is it a matter of getting in front of kids before they get hooked on drugs, or maybe getting with an offender and saying, let's figure out how you can not repeat this?
Brad, you're speaking my language, because we're going to talk about the kids a lot, because that is the key. You know, what our office does and what a lot of law enforcement does is reactive justice. But what my focus is proactive justice. We have to reduce crime by preventing that offense in the first place. And we have certain predictors that we can use to be effective. But one of the most effective ways is to get to our kids early and often and keep them out of the system.
Is that a similar approach to gangs, to make sure that we can get in children's faces early and say this is not the right path?
You're asking me why I was at a school this morning. That's exactly why. We have the Prosecutors in Schools program that we've been at different schools throughout the past 3 years. But it's more than that. We have to make sure that we're stopping the cycle. You know, there's a lot of resources out there for kids once they start acting out and getting in trouble. But what about the kids that we know are statistically most likely to end up in trouble based on maybe they have an incarcerated parent, maybe they have a parent who's suffering from substance use, things like that we can use as predictors to help us say, all right, let's link them with the resources that they need so that we never have to worry about them breaking into a house or doing something at school that's disruptive.
You know, I think it bears repeating, Sheriff Richard Roundtree was on this broadcast a few weeks ago, and he talked about how all gang members have a home to go to at night. You know, there's not some gang house, you know, where they live. And so much of this can be avoided if families step up and play their role, right?
That's a huge piece of it. We need parents to actually parent. You need to know where your child is. You know, when the sunlights go out, or when the street lights go out, you know, when the sun is down, we need to be in the house. And we need to know where our children are. And there's another time that we think about that people don't realize is the most likely time for juvenile crime to take place. It's between the hours of 2 and 6.
Really? Like right after school
Right.
until dark?
Right. And so that's when most offenses are taking place. So that's the time that we need to fill up. I'm so thankful for community organizations like Jesse Norman School of the Arts. They're partnering with our office with a juvenile program, helping kids stay in the classroom and out of the courtroom.
What made you want to do this job? It's a huge job. It's got to be frustrating at times because it is, I think, many times an uphill battle, but you're fighting it. Was it when you were an intern in the DA's office back in the day? Was the spark lit then?
So when I was an intern, I was just hoping to get a job in the DA's office. I wasn't necessarily trying to go for the top job. But I was in private practice when I decided to run for this office, and it really came down to two things. I watched a serial rapist go free time and time again, 3 separate jury trials. He was acquitted, and then he got out and reoffended. On the flip side, I had clients who had done minor things who were being put in prison for things like driving on a suspended license. And that's backwards to me. Mm-hmm. What I want is a system of justice that understands the difference between the monsters we have to take out and the people we need to help out. And I'm happy to report that that serial rapist is now in prison for the rest of his life.
Does prison help fix people? Is there a chance somebody can go in and be rehabilitated and just be a model citizen after? Does it work like that?
I'll tell you, there are models that can work, but largely we have to make that call based on, are we going to lock this problem away from us, or are we actually going to be able to fix what's going on in this person's life? Prison is not often fixing what's going on in people's lives. And so if you are a violent offender, if you're a sex offender, someone that keeps me up at night, that's the person we're trying to lock away. But as far as trying to change behavior, prison is not always the best model. And so we're working on programs that help address what we know are the 3 main common factors in someone offending or committing a crime.
What are some of those things that make people go down the wrong path?
Sure. So it's the lack of education, it's a lack of economic opportunity, and it's a lack of ecosystemic upbringing, meaning things that I had the privilege of learning in the home that others might not, like how do you tie a tie? How do you write a resume or do an interview? And the point is, we want to address those factors that are the common denominators in criminal offenses, particularly for youthful people. We're working on a program now called Checks Over Stripes, and it targets 17 to 25-year-olds, that emerging adult category, where we know that a felony at that time can result in them being in that cycle of incarceration.
Yep.
What we want to avoid is them creating more victims throughout their behavior. And so by linking them with private businesses that will hire them, linking them with organizations like the Jobs Connections program through Goodwill, getting them their GED through Augusta Tech, and helping them learn financial literacy once they start making that money. You know, banks are coming in and saying, we'll help teach those courses. All of that is the community responding and making sure that we are having a proactive approach to justice.
So it sounds like people in our community, businesses and otherwise, are buying into this. Do you ever get pushback saying, no, this is a little bit too scary. I need an employee I can totally trust who's 100%, above board? Or is everyone saying, no, bring these folks in, let's help?
So I'll tell you, from the actual community, I don't get pushback from this. From those who have very loud voices, sometimes you could probably call my first 3 years pushback, right? Yeah. But the reality is, people understand the difference between when you need to use the stick versus the carrot. Mm-hmm. When you need to enforce the law in a way that takes someone out of the community versus enforcing the law in a way that brings them into the community and helps them be a vibrant and vital part of it.
We could probably spend 10 editions of the Means Report talking about this next subject, but I want to try to get a feel. We all watch the crime shows on television and we think we know how the system works. Let me ask you to walk us through how a case gets to you and gets to perhaps a trial. Does it start with a law enforcement officer making an arrest and then everything follows?
So the vast majority of the cases that we deal with come to us through warrants that have already been executed. Okay. So someone's already been arrested and the sheriff's office or the law enforcement agency will send us the investigation. We look through it and we're looking for certain things like, one, we have to make sure that law enforcement follow the law themselves because that's a necessary piece under our Constitution. We have to ensure the rights of others. Two, we're looking at, is there a probable cause? And lastly, we're looking at, is there proof beyond a reasonable doubt? Because it only takes probable cause to get a warrant.
Right.
But in order for me to be successful in court, I have to have proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a very high standard. It's actually the highest standard in our legal system.
Would you find that in most cases, law enforcement officers, those men and women working so hard in the field, do things properly and you can proceed from there? Or are there cases where you look and you say, uh-oh, this step was missed, this is a loser of a case?
Absolutely. In the majority of cases, we are going forward and we're able to go forward because the law has been followed. But there are times when we have to look at it and we say, all right, we need to either retrain on something or we need to explain why a certain procedure does not work. And that's all part of our job. We are the advisors for law enforcement.
How are we doing when it comes to citizens trusting law enforcement? I know sometimes there's a barrier between the deputies and other officers out there and the public that they serve. Are we making progress there?
I want to be clear that it doesn't serve anyone for us not to have trust between the community and law enforcement, that it's hurting us to not have that. And so I know that we have law enforcement agents and officers who are being intentional about trying to build that relationship. But we have to understand that there's been years and decades of mistreatment. There's been times when things have not been proper. And even from my office, there has been times when sentences have been handed down that were not right and that impacted families. I mean, you talk about the war on drugs, we're talking about many people taken out of the community for nonviolent offenses. And so I think we are experiencing part of a reckoning of that. And what we have to do as law enforcement officials is to communicate, to be transparent, to recognize when we need to be held accountable ourselves, and calling it out.
We are talking to Augusta District Attorney Jared Williams here on the Means Report. When we come back, we're going to talk about how District Attorney Williams' office investigates cases on its own, where they don't maybe come from deputies, where they initiate the investigation and everything that happens after that on the Means Report. Welcome back to the Means Report. Augusta Judicial Circuit District Attorney Jared Williams is our special guest today. I want to get right back to it. I don't want to run out of time with DA Williams. You were talking about how cases go from the streets basically to the courtroom, and we talked about your review of the arrest, and if you deem that it's good and clean, then you move forward. What happens after that?
Sure. So if we have proof beyond a reasonable doubt, then what we're going to do is we're going to, in most cases, present that case to the grand jury.
Okay.
That's a group of citizens, just regular community members, who are banded together through the law to be able to review cases, they hear evidence, and then they make a decision on whether there's a true bill of indictment. An indictment is what you hear on TV. And so from there, that case is then triggered into our court system, where we are now setting it for an arraignment, where the defendant most often will plead not guilty, which just ensures their rights and gives them the opportunity to engage in the discovery process. And during that time, the case is what we call trial pending. And so cases can be trial pending for a matter of months. They can be trial pending for a matter of years. That's one of the things that we're working on, is how to build in efficiency into our system so we can shave months and years off the process. But that's typically how it will go, and then a case will either be resolved short of a trial. We have special programs we can put cases into, like my diversion program. We can just do a regular plea resolution, or we can have a trial. We're actually in trial right as we speak.
Do you prefer that these cases are resolved before trial?
Well, it's the most efficient and effective way, because we always prefer that someone who has done something wrong is willing to take accountability for their actions and recognize that they need to atone for those actions. But sometimes, people have the right to go to trial and make us prove the case. That's why we have to have that proof beyond a reasonable doubt in order to ethically go forward. And in those cases, we don't penalize someone for having exercised their rights, but it does speak to whether that person is willing to accept responsibility for what they did.
Do you ever initiate cases on your own, where it doesn't start with an arrest by a law enforcement officer? It starts with you, or you get a tip from someone who says, hey, DA, please look into this. Does that ever happen?
It does happen. It's very rare for us to initiate our own case, because I'm big on specialization. In fact, I specialized my office so that we could have a violent crimes unit and a special victims unit, because those cases are important. And I just think that the people who do the same thing over and over tend to be better at it, right? They get their 10,000 hours quickly, right?
Right.
So when we do get information or we get tips, I was actually talking about one with one of my investigators yesterday. We'll look into it, and if we feel like it needs to be further investigated, we'll then refer it to the appropriate law enforcement agency. It just makes sure that everything is the way that it should be, and it helps us focus on what we're good at, which is going into court and getting justice for victims.
I know that major crimes was a big focus of your campaign, and certainly in the 3 years you've been in office. How's that division going, and what sort of cases do you all look at there?
Sure. So we created the Major Crimes Division in December of 2021. It was one of my first priorities, and that is comprised of a violent crimes and gang unit and then the special victims unit. So the violent crimes unit will handle things like your murder cases, armed robberies, aggravated assaults that have grievous injury, things of that nature, and then all of our gang cases. Whereas the Special Victims Unit deals with crimes against women and children and sensitive matters.
How do you decide the cases that you're going to take the lead on and the cases that your assistant district attorneys will do? Are there ever conversations where y'all have to make those choices?
So when I told you that 80% trial success number, that's not me. That's my attorneys and my great staff.
Yeah.
I mean, they do an outstanding job day in and day out. And so I never want to jump in on a case unless I can actually add value to it. There are certain things that, because they're in the courtroom every day, they can't do that I can, and vice versa. Because they're in the courtroom, there are things they can do that I can't.
Yeah.
And so it's about knowing who's in the best position to get justice in a given case. Every once in a while I do hop on cases. Any pending capital litigation I'm heading up, and certain murder cases I will handle myself.
What about crimes against elderly folks, crimes against people who can't defend themselves? We're supposed to be objective up here on the news each night, but I promise you there are nights where it's tough to hold back tears because these folks are so vulnerable and people are so mean in this world sometimes. What can you do to help out those folks? People
are mean, people are selfish.
Yeah.
And I've got an elderly grandmother in this community. I want to make sure that she's protected just like everyone else is. And so we take that very seriously. Our crimes against the vulnerable and elderly are typically referred to our special victims unit.
Okay.
And so we have an investigator that works with that unit, and again, we are trying to make sure that the person in the best position to investigate the case does so. If we feel there needs to be more follow-up investigation, then our investigators will get involved.
One of the more popular series that we do here on News Channel 6 is about cold cases. My colleague Renetta Dubose leads the way on that, and it's very popular. People want to see cold cases resolved. Is that an area that applies to that pertains to your office, where you decide whether a case goes cold and y'all sort of back off of it, or is that more sheriff's office and other law enforcement agencies?
It's more the sheriff's office, because if it's a cold case, then there's no warrant for me to pursue.
Okay, that makes sense. So is this whole DA thing, and I've listened to your answers obviously, and it sounds like it does sort of match what we see on these crime shows on TV. Do those television shows do a pretty good job of capturing what you do, except for the fact that they make it all resolved in an hour?
Yeah, I'll say that the crime shows typically get it wrong because the attorneys are focused on one case,
right.
As opposed to most of my attorneys are handling 250 to 300 cases at a time.
Okay, what?
Yes.
How does that even work?
On a prayer.
On a
right?
prayer, yeah.
And we're always hoping for more staff and more resources. We're actually looking to get some technology that can assist us. So right now I have a staff member who goes to the law enforcement agencies and actually downloads information and brings it back to us. We're in 2023. The sheriff's office ought to be able to click a button and give us access to information, and we in turn click a button and give access to the other side. That being a more efficient process, we can shave probably a year off of a given case just by doing that. And so we're always looking at ways to become more efficient so that we can help our attorneys, our victim advocates, our legal assistants, and our investigators.
Are your people overwhelmed? Do they just sit at their desks sometimes and stare into space and say, this is hard? Because listening to you describe it, it sounds very, very tedious and difficult?
Look, we have a resilient bunch that are always, they don't just sit at their desk because they're usually running with the, like chickens.
No, I bet.
But the reality is, when you have a victim that you're fighting for, when you have a child that you are fighting for, I'm sorry, I don't want to get emotional, but it's so easy to take yourself out of it when you realize what you're really fighting for, and when you realize that sometimes we're the last line of defense.
Yeah, no, that makes 100% sense, and I appreciate you bringing that to our attention, and we feel for you in that regard. It never ends. I mean, it's not like you go home and the next day you get a whole clean slate. This stays with you, and these cases linger sometimes, as you mentioned, for years.
I was telling some folks earlier this week, I used to cut the grass over where the courthouse now is, right? And when I was done cutting grass, I could look at the field and say, all right, I've done something. I can see my work. We never get the benefit of looking at a mowed field. It's always going, and your work can follow you home in a way that some other things don't.
God, what a great example. That is the number one thing in my life that just gives me the most satisfaction, mowing the yard and then looking at it. It's true. I mean, it's instant gratification, and it's fulfilling. I hope I can hit on these last two things before you leave. One is this law that establishes this commission to oversee prosecutors and discipline or remove them if the commission deems that necessary. You're part of a big effort to fight that law. Tell me why.
Absolutely. I'm fighting the law because it's unconstitutional, and in 3 states I have sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution. Anytime that we have a separate branch of government trying to dictate what other public officials and constitutional officers do, it's a problem, particularly when it is made political by its very own inception. These are politically appointed commission members, and on top of that, when they are able to invade the purview of that public official. So for us, one of the tenets of prosecution is having discretion, and you want your prosecutor to have discretion. You don't want them to have to always put somebody's son in prison for 10 years. You want them to be able to look at the facts and say, you know what, there's a better way to go forward. But when you have this commission that's able to remove you from office and ban you from office simply because you take a stance on the crimes that are important to your community and the ones that you don't have the resources to pursue, that's a real problem.
My last question, and you touched on this earlier with a couple of the answers when it comes to kids especially. How can we help you? How can Augusta citizens make the district attorney's job easier?
Sure. So one, come for jury duty.
Yeah, don't try to get out of it.
Don't try to get out of it. But two, if you see something, say something. We are right now working with a partner law enforcement agent in a different city trying to track down a witness because she's evading the process. But that can be the key between justice and not justice in a case, or safety and not safety for our community. So if you see something, please say something and let law enforcement work with you. Lastly, work with your children. And if you don't have children, or if you got a kid in your neighborhood that you see going down the wrong way, it would be so much better to spend some time getting to know them and helping them as opposed to just waiting for the inevitabilities of that. And particularly, if you are a grandmother who's struggling, or a mother or parent, I would rather you come to me and bring your child to me before they mess up than them have to come across my desk, right? And so I have an open invitation to anyone who wants to have me sit down with their kid. It's so much better. And I had a grandmother actually take me up on this, and I get to spend time with her grandson. He actually came to a radio show with me a few weeks ago. I'd rather do that than end up having to prosecute the case.
Absolutely. Fix it while you still can.
Absolutely.
Jared Williams, thanks for the hard work that you and your team do. Give our regards to them when you get back to the office, and tell them we thank them, and I just appreciate your time.
I sure will. Thank you.
Absolutely. Augusta District Attorney Jared Williams, our special guest on the Means Report. When we come back, how you can help us get more guests like Mr. Williams in a moment.